I don't think, and we're not going to be doing any small group work or anything. So, all right, Jed, I'll let you take it away.
All right, thank you, Eileen. I'm going to share my screen if that's all right. So good morning or good afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. My name is Jed Koball. If you don't know me, I'm a mission co-worker serving in Peru, and I collaborate with the Presbyterian Hunger Program on this initiative called Solidarity Hour. So we're very happy to have you with us today, and we're going to begin our time with a little bit of centering, beginning with this prayer. It is in the depths of life that we find you, at the heart of this moment, at the center of our soul, deep in the earth and its eternal stirrings. You are the ground of all being, the wellspring of time, womb of the earth, the seed force of stars. And so at the opening of this day, we wait, not for blessings from afar, but for you, the very soil of our soul, the early freshness of morning, the first breath of day. This prayer comes from a book called Praying with the Earth, a prayer book for peace by John Philip Newell, which I found very helpful. And so I would recommend it to you as well. And this next centering piece is a song that actually comes from Peru. So I get to share a little bit of my experience with you. And may this song help bring us into this space.
Jed, we're not hearing the audio.
I'm going to,
Oh,
because I forgot to optimize. I'll do that again. All right, apologies. I'll try that.
El día nos llenamos de tu luz y al final de la jornada no nos dejas de alumbrar. No se apague, Madre, el fuego que tenemos por amar, por cuidarte y respetarte, por vivir y construir. Madre Tierra, Pachamama, te venimos a cantar. Pachamama, alabar a mi Señor. Madre Tierra, Pachamama, te venimos a cantar. Madre Tierra, Pachamama, alabar a mi Señor. Pachamama, Madre buena, destruida sin amor, con tu suelo maltratado y ríos enturbiados ya no hay bosques, hay ciudades con cemento y soledad. Perdón, Madre, por mi olvido, Madre Tierra,
So today we are going to hear from Barry Vickrey from the Sunnyvale Presbyterian Church in Sunnyvale, California. I met Barry about 2 months ago here in Peru. He came down with a group from San Jose Presbytery to see our partners, to know them and the issues they're addressing. And over the course of that time, I spent with Barry and the San Jose team. Barry and I got to talking about things like doctrine of discovery and Indigenous law and Indigenous land rights. One thing came to led to another, and Barry told us about the case of the Amah Mutsan Tribal Band in California, and how Sunnyvale Presbyterian Church got involved. And so we're going to learn from Barry about that case and the role of Sunnyvale Presbyterian Church. So I'm going to stop sharing and let Barry speak to us.
Thank you, Jed. I want to start by noting that I realize that there are issues related to different terms that we use when talking about these subjects, and I want to just tell you what terms I use and why. You'll hear me refer to Native American. You'll also hear me refer to American Indian or even Indian. In my experience in working with both leaders of the American Indian community, scholars, just average folks, back in the Dakotas where I worked, they were not uncomfortable with the term American Indian, which is the US Census term, or even the term Indian. So I'll be using all of those. There are obviously issues related to those. I've always liked the Canadian First Nations personally, and then Indigenous, of course, is an important term that's used a lot of places. Also, I know there are issues about the word tribe. I'll be referring to the Amah Mutsan Tribal Band because that is what they call themselves. And then also the area of law that I'll be referring to is usually referred to as federal Indian law or just Indian law. So when you hear any of those terms, I know we could have long discussions about the advantages or disadvantages of many of them, but I just wanted to let you know what I'm using and why. I think I need to spend a moment telling you a little bit about my background. I grew up in Tennessee, where Andrew Jackson was a great hero. At the time, I didn't know about the Trail of Tears. I didn't know about that he built his political career on killing Indians and taking their land to give to his political allies. So my childhood, as he was presented hero, Andrew Jackson, I now consider America's Hitler, just to make a comment on that. In 1982, I became a member of the faculty at the University of North Dakota Law School, and North Dakota has a significant American Indian population. I walked, being a, kind of a foolhardy young faculty member, I walked into the dean's office one day and said, "We should be teaching Indian law," to which he responded that I could teach it. And I had not taken Indian law, I had no background in Indian law. I did teach it for 2 years while trying to find someone who was actually qualified to teach it, which I succeeded in doing. In 1993, I moved to the University of South Dakota Law School to become the dean there. Fortunately, USD already had a prominent Indian law professor, and I made the recruitment of Indian students a priority that had mixed success. I did hire the first tenure track American Indian professor, and that resulted in a prominent legislator in the state proposing to close the law school. His real objective was to run me and the professor out of the state. He failed in that. I stayed 18 years as dean. The faculty member gained tenure and then moved on to the University of New Mexico, which has maybe the best Indian law program in the country. During that time, I got a phone call from that legislator in which he told me that his concern was that this professor was, quote, "not one of our kind." Now, this was a person who had grown up a half an hour from the law school in Sioux City, Iowa, member of the Santee Sioux tribe, which is nearby there. But then he'd gone off to some second-rate institutions. He'd gone to college at Harvard and law school at Berkeley. But he was not one of our kind. I still tremble when I think about that. I had the privilege in 2014 of teaching property law at the American Indian Law Center's Pre-Law Institute at the University of New Mexico. And this is the preeminent program in the country in preparing college students who are Native American to go on to law school. And it was quite an experience as a white guy to be teaching property law of all things to American Indian students. And of course, the first case in the leading case book in property law is Johnson v. McIntosh. So we got to talk about doctrine of discovery and other things, and that was a great experience. With that background, I'd like Jed to show the video about Juristack. Juristack is what the Amah Mutsan Tribal Band refers to the sacred land that's at the heart of this controversy over mining.
Think you need to try to hit play again, maybe?
Our creation story tells us Creator specifically picked our people to care for the lands of our territory, which Creator defined for us.
Jed, we're not seeing
Yeah,
the video.
I'm hearing something, but not, the video
We're
is not
hearing the
moving.
tribal chair, but not.
Okay.
It looked like the play button hadn't even been hit on our screen.
Oh, interesting. Okay, hold on. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
I'm gonna do something here. I'm gonna send the link to the chat just in case I can't get it to work again.
Okay.
And maybe you can.
And that link is also in the message that Eileen sent out.
I'll try one more time. If it doesn't work, then maybe you can try, Eileen.
Okay.
Our creation story tells us Creator specifically picked our people to care for the lands of our territory, which Creator defined for us. What was most important is that we maintain the land as sacred. Juristack is the most sacred site of our tribal territory. My name is Valentin Lopez, and I'm the chairman of the Amah Mutsan Tribal Band. And our tribe is comprised of the descendants of the indigenous peoples that were taken to Mission San Juan Bautista in Santa Cruz. You know, and once they bought Juristack, they announced shortly thereafter that they applied for a sand and gravel mining permit right at Juristack where the ceremonies were held. It was a place where we held our most important and our highest ceremonies. They are also trying to make the claim that this here would be good for the environment because they could put 95% of that ranch into conservation and do mining on the 5%. That 95% of the conservation values would offset any damage done by the mine. However, that totally ignores the spiritual values. You know, I mean, if you put no regard to spiritual values, then that may be a true claim. But Native American spirituality has never been respected or protected or valued. As part of the AB 52 process, we requested an ethnographic study to be completed. And that ethnographic study is to document the evidence, both the written records and the tribal oral history of Uristoc. Our history and our culture was never understood, but there's so much value and so much importance to our traditional ways of taking care of the environment, that they should be working with us to help us restore that knowledge so that we can know how to take care of Mother Earth going forward into the future.
Thanks, Jed. Before I forget, in the chat, you'll find a link to the Tribal Band's Protect Uristoc site, and there's a lot of additional material there. The current status, which actually is from the newspaper article that Eileen sent out, because it's actually a little more current than what you'll find on the tribal site. And then I've also confirmed a little bit of this with a Santa Clara County staff person. In July of 2022, Santa Clara County released the draft environmental impact review, which is 652 pages long. I have not read it. Public comments were due until November 7, 2022, and more than 10,000 comments were received, all but 10 of which were in opposition to the project, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. Anyway, the Santa Clara County Department of Planning and Development staff is now reviewing those more than 10,000 public comments and will release the final environmental impact review in late 2025 or early 2026. So I discovered after Jed, or I really came to grips with the fact after Jed asked me if I do this, that I really didn't know what was happening. And it's because not much is happening right now. Everything is sort of stalled because of the environmental impact review process. So I wanted to just make a couple of comments about how this project compares to, I should say, the Oak Flat, Apache, Arizona project that we talked about last month. This is an open pit sand and gravel quarry that would be involved. Now, sand and gravel are pretty important to fast growing areas like the Bay Area and the South Bay particularly. But of course, then some people would prefer that areas not grow quite so fast. So the importance of the sand and gravel to the area is actually something that maybe works against the mining project. But by comparison to Oak Flat, sand and gravel, as important as it is not probably as important as one of the largest copper reserves in the world, which is what's involved at Oak Flat. Also, I think it's I'm pretty confident that the developer of this proposed project, the Uristoc, is not as powerful as the international companies that are involved at Oak Flat. Also, I want to emphasize, I know for this project here, the opposition of environmental groups has been very important. And also of political groups. And I couldn't tell from our discussion last month exactly how that was working with Oak Flat, although obviously it was political groups who exacerbated the process by getting that federal legislation that involved the land swap. Also, as you saw the chairman refer to there, California has a tribal cultural resources review process, which is referred to as AB 52 because of the legislation involved. And because of that, 40 pages of that draft environmental impact review is a review of the impact on cultural resources in the area. And I know that Arizona has a similar process, but I don't know how it has been involved in the Oak Flat. Sort of the bottom line here is that, at least as it refers to this project here, the environmental review process is a big deal, and it essentially has the whole project on hold, at least for right now, and has generated a lot of opposition. And that may not be the case in Arizona with the Oak Flat, because Senators McCain and Flake intervened with this land swap that may have in some way undermined that environmental impact review process. So the thing that Jed specifically asked me to talk about is how our church, Sunnyvale Presbyterian, got involved in this issue. So let me back up a little bit to 2016 and 2018. In 2016, the PCUSA General Assembly adopted a recommendation, and then in 2018, a report dealing with the doctrine of discovery. And I suspect many of you know as much or more about that than I do. And that resulted in this confession of complicity and apology that we'll I think end the meeting with later this morning. And then in 2020, the stated clerk, Reverend Dr. J. Herbert Nelson II, issued a call to action. So in December 2020, the youth ministry lead elder in our church reported that the youth ministry team had adopted a land acknowledgement and proposed that session do the same. And I think all of you know that a land acknowledgement is where at the beginning of a meeting you would acknowledge that the land you're on used to be occupied by other people. And the 2018 PCUSA report had included a recommendation of doing land acknowledgements. I think the lead elder was motivated because her college alma mater had done a land acknowledgement. And then our director of youth ministry, who was also the peacemaking advocate for the presbytery, had been working on this. Well, I was the person on session who raised concerns about doing a land acknowledgement. And my concerns were that you shouldn't do a land acknowledgement unless you were doing something more than that. And I was drawing on a resource that I know I've mentioned to some of you called Turtle Talk, which is a very strong online service that's operated by Professor Matthew Fletcher, who's one of the leading Indian law scholars in the world. And on Turtle Talk, you will find this language from the Michigan State University, which is where Matt is, American Indian and Indigenous Studies program. Quote, "We respect the desire to recognize the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary stewards of the land. However, we ask that when offering a land acknowledgement, remember that these acknowledgements must be preceded by relationships with living Indigenous people, communities, and nations. This declaration must then be followed with ongoing commitments to these same communities. Land acknowledgements are a responsibility." So I took the position on session that we really weren't in a position to be doing a land acknowledgement if we didn't have a relationship with current folks and a commitment to go into the future. And I guess that kind of at least got me into the discussion of this topic. So in November 20 of 2021, the Presbytery of San Jose adopted the confession of complicity that we're going to read later on, which had been recommended by the Peace and Justice Work Group and the Peacemaking Advocate. I was an elder commissioner, as was the lead elder for youth ministry at that meeting. So on December 14 of 2021, we reported on this to the Sunnyvale session, and the session joined in reading that confession. In February 5 of 2022, the Presbytery Peace and Justice Work Group proposed to Presbytery specific actions to support the Amah Mutsan Tribal Band in their effort to stop this quarry. And so on February 15 of 2022, our session voted to support the Amah Mutsan in their efforts, including a letter. The tribal band had provided samples, so I drafted that letter, which emphasized our faith community and our connection. And I'm going to try now to see if I can pull up that letter in kind of a roundabout way. Let's see if I can do that. And I got it there, and now I need to go back to Zoom and see if I can share my screen. And let's see. Okay, I think it's there. Do you see it?
Yes.
Okay, so this was a letter from our session on our letterhead to the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors and the County Planning Commission, because this is the group that has to provide the permit for the project. And again, as I said, we were relying on samples provided by the tribal band, which described the project in paragraph 2. And we pointed out that it would desecrate this site both spiritually and ecologically. And we elaborated a bit on that, again, drawing from their sample. And then I sort of punched up the language about the fact that we're a faith family at Sunnyvale Presbyterian, and that our support for the Amah Mutsan was based upon our respect for their sacred land, and also emphasizing their care of the land and preservation of it, both ecologically and as a sacred place. And that's in this next to last paragraph, and then closed again with an emphasis on our support for, as people of faith, for the spirituality of the Amah Mutsan. So we sent that letter on February 17, and I'll stop sharing now. And then we were invited, or the Sunnyvale City Council, our local city council, on June 17 was considering a resolution to support the Amah Mutsan, and I was invited and authorized by our session to speak on behalf of our session at that city council meeting. Again, I emphasized our connection as a faith community to their spiritual, their sacred lands. And I should say that I was nowhere near the star of that presentation, because the tribal chair, whom you saw in the video, did 3 minutes. That was all you were allowed. They were incredibly eloquent on the sacred nature of the land and on their land management. And I think it actually was better than the video we watched. And then also there were a lot of environmental and political groups that spoke at that meeting. And so the city council did adopt a resolution that went to the Santa Clara County groups opposing the mining project. And so I would actually encourage you to go to that website that I put in the chat and specifically click on the button for statements of support, and then specifically click on the one for faith groups, because it's really fascinating what a breadth of support the Amah Mutsan Tribal Band received from a broad group of faith communities. And then the final thing I will say is that Jed's invitation brought me back to the fact that I really hadn't done much to keep up with this for the last 2 years. But then neither has the tribal band, because it's all stopped by the environmental review process. But I was reminded that I need, going back to that Michigan State statement, I need to be thinking more about what our ongoing relationships and commitments should be on this and other issues related to Indigenous peoples in this area. So that's what I have to say, and I would be delighted to hear comments or try to respond to any questions anybody might have.
Thank you so much, Barry. This is really insightful and really very helpful. For those of you who, just as a refresher of sorts, this space that we're in, Solidarity Hour, kind of comes out of the Global Solidarity Collective, which comes out of PHP. But it all kind of began last year when we read a book called The Land is Not Empty, Following Jesus and Dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery. So this concept, there it is, that's the book. So we've been wrestling with doctrine of discovery for a while now. And in light of the General Assembly's decisions in 2016 and 2018 to repudiate the doctrine of discovery, and we kind of wrestled with, what does it mean to repudiate? You know, we have to do more than make a statement. And we have to, you know, and as Barry says, we have to do more than just make a land acknowledgement. There has to be action and relationship and action alongside of it. And so part of this space is to help one another do that. And so Barry brings this great case study before us, and you know, and how he really helped Sunnyvale Presbyterian Church get involved in this. So thank you very much. Definitely, anyone who has any questions or comments, please feel free to jump in right now.
Could you put the website in the chat again?
The Eurostock.
I'll put it in there again, just in case.
The one you mentioned in your talk.
Yeah, it's all the
thank
way
you.
at the top of the chat at 9:10.
I
just
think
put it back in there.
some folks jumped
There it
on a
is.
little late. And
I
so
got it. Thank you.
Yeah, there it is again. Yeah, that site has not been, from what I can tell, updated very recently, but it really does capture not only the nature of the project, but particularly if you'll click on those statements of support and especially the ones from faith communities. I think it's very interesting to see the kind of support they got from a broad band of folks.
And so go ahead, Eileen.
Oh, I was just going to say a few things between the Oak Flat case and this case. Clearly with Oak Flat, the main argument right now is that it's got such spiritual and religious importance to the Western Apache. And I hear that similarity between this case as well. But with Oak Flat, everything is on hold while there's obviously appeals happening. But while they finished an environmental impact study, so they're waiting for the results to come out. But the thing is, whichever way it goes, as long as the report comes out, whether it's negative or positive, the project can then move forward, because it was just stipulated that there be the study, not that the result of the study would actually determine one way or another, because they already have given this land to the corporation through the legislation.
Yeah, I think, Eileen, the big difference, and I know very little about this, but based on what I saw last month and a little bit I did, you know, the big difference is that you had 2 U.S. senators step in and pass legislation to do this land swap, and it was, you know, approved by the Obama administration, the legislation was. And in addition to that, to add an even more pessimistic note, with what the U.S. Supreme Court has done in the last couple of weeks to the authority of administrative agencies, any administrative process, including environmental review, has now been undermined in the service of conservative corporate interest. So the difference, fortunately for us here, is that the quarry here cannot go forward without a land use permit from the county. And of course, unfortunately, the Oak Flat is way past that stage.
Barry, I was going to add that another difference, a big difference between the case here and Oak Flats is that we're in the state of California.
Yes.
And in California, there's, at least in Northern California, there's a presumption that environmental issues are really important. That unfortunately is not the case in a lot of parts of our country. But you have, you know, a lot of environmental groups that would immediately jump on this just for the environmental impact. And that's one reason we live in California.
Yeah. Well, and as I was suggesting, I think particularly when the project is to produce sand and gravel so that we can build more buildings and, and more roads and all of the things that you know, some very reasonable people question are needed, and you know, to have a kind of project that would generate anti-growth sentiment on top of the desire to protect the environment, the animal and plant species, et cetera, on the site. I think those are really forceful, and you know, they show the difference between a project like that and a project like Oak Flat, where we're all trying to get more copper so we can have more computers and telephones and all the other things that people seem to have not decided we have too many of yet.
Cindy, you have a question or a comment?
I don't have a question so much as I just, what I really appreciate about all of this, Barry and Jed, is it's a blueprint for, I mean, churches, ordinary churches, to look around and say, what does love my neighbor mean? And I really appreciate that that you're sharing this information step by step. I think a lot of churches, I think a lot of Presbyterians just think, well, there's nothing I can do because I'm just a person, or I'm just a Sunday school class, or I'm just a congregation. And I really appreciate that. And then the other thing that I've noticed, and I've noticed this more and more as we talked about Oak Flats, and now we're talking about what's going on with this travel group, is the word sacred. I wish we as Christians use the word sacred as much as our Native siblings do, because what is sacred must be held on to. So thank you so much for this, and thanks for making this possible too, Jed.
Thank you. And yeah, that word sacred is so important because it so much defines the relationship with the land. And that gets at the very heart of doctrine of discovery, is how we relate to the land. And you kind of made light of it in introducing yourself, of having taught property law to American Indian students. But I mean, I can only imagine, you know, but property law is the essence of United States and so much of the world, you know, that you can privately own land, can be owned, you know. And I don't know, I mean, does that raise, maybe you haven't got into that depth of conversation of that, you know, what does this mean when we defend the rights of the Amah Mutsan or any other, you know, Native American peoples or indigenous peoples around the world and their claims to land? I mean, it's fundamentally, there's this, it gets to the heart of, you know, some legal concepts of, can you own land or not? And I don't know, did that come up or raise any resistance around the session table, or how was that in your church or anywhere?
We did not get into that, but Jed, I apologize. I'm going to take your question and take it in a slightly different direction, because the one thing that I used to do with my classes at the University of South Dakota in property law, which might have one or two, some years 3 or 4 American Indian students if we were lucky, is I would take Johnson v. McIntosh and I would try to get the students to realize that under the doctrine of discovery, the Europeans had taken the land, and whatever interest the original inhabitants might have, they had defined it as not being ownership, but of being occupancy. And I would say to the students, how many of you have ever been renters? And everybody had been. And I said, that's essentially what the court in Johnson v. McIntosh said the American Indians were, the Native Americans were. They were now renters. And that occupancy right could then be extinguished in one of 2 or 3 ways. Purchase, which was done, conquest, which was certainly one of the worst parts of Johnson v. McIntosh, is where Chief Justice Marshall says the courts can't undo what the military has already done, which I think is maybe the worst statement of might makes right, and that's in American jurisprudence. But anyway, so purchase, conquest, or treaties, which of course are purchase at the end of a gun barrel. So it's a combination of the two. And so that's how I would try to present this to students, and including the American Indian students at the summer program, because a lot of those American Indian students really didn't have a framework for understanding the doctrine of discovery and putting it in a way that they could relate to it and maybe help others understand it. So that's what I would do with Johnson v. McIntosh. But as far as property ownership, no, that would be a wonderful topic. But I guess one of the things I would say about the blueprint that Cindy was just talking about strongly is that if a couple of people on session care enough about something, pretty much everybody else is going to go along, from my experience. And so if you're thinking about how to have an impact, if you get in there and, maybe you get 2 or 3 other people together with you working on it, the session's probably going to go along. And I won't talk about what I think the reasons for that are, but that's been my experience.
And I think that it's also important, Barry, because it didn't cost you anything.
That's the upside and the downside. It should have cost us something.
It should have cost, but they're going to say it didn't cost anything. Let's say yes. So. And
thanks to Jed asking me to do this, I'm going to get back to the issue of what it ought to cost us, which is, some support to Native American congregations, which I know you can do through the PCUSA, or another thing you can do here is actually contribute as a quote tax from our church to an organization that works on tribal land restoration in the Bay Area. So there are ways in which it can cost, and it should cost. And so thanks to Jed, I'm going to go back, and I'm now the treasurer of the church, so I have a little bit of clout I can use on the issues related to cost.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Barry. This has been really, really, really insightful and really enjoyable. We've got about 10 minutes left in our time. And before we close with the confession of complicity from the 222nd General Assembly of 2016, which Barry has referenced, I wanted to make just a few brief updates about the most recent General Assembly, which finished just last week, the 226th General Assembly. And I'll go ahead and share my screen again, just because I like to do that. And I will try to play from current slide. Yeah. Oops. Maybe. So I'm only going to speak briefly to two. And the first one, two overtures that were passed. One was I imagine some of you have been following this for the past decade or so of efforts to get the PCUSA, or the investing agencies of the Presbyterian Church USA, to divest all from fossil fuels. And they, for really interesting compelling reasons, chose to continue in a process of partial divestment from fossil fuels. And I think the primary reason there was, excuse me, the mission, the MRTI, which is the committee that PCUSA that kind of oversees investment, has relationships with communities that are impacted by fossil fuel companies, and they can, to a certain extent, be spokespersons for those communities on the boards of these fossil fuel companies. So I think the value of that relationship with impacted communities was considered important, and so they didn't want to completely divest, but a partial divestment, so that engagement with local communities could continue. That was my understanding. And of course, Rebecca Barnes, who's on this, well, others can speak to this call, who may want to, could speak to that. But the other piece I wanted to mention, which I thought was really interesting, was the lithium mining paper. And this was a charge to the Advisory Committee on Social Witness Policy to investigate the impacts of lithium mining in particular, which is happening in, all over the world, but in South America, Western US as well, in Nevada, and lithium being part of this energy transition, moving from fossil fuels to this so-called green economy. And of course, there's a lot of significant environmental impact from this mining. But what we learned is that more than half of not just lithium, but the dozens of minerals needed for the energy transition, more than half of them are located on indigenous lands around the world, including in the US. And so this paper put forth directed the church to advocate for the indigenous right to free, prior, and informed consent, which is established by the UN Declaration on Indigenous Rights, and basically saying indigenous peoples should have the final say on whether or not these mining projects are going to take place on their land or not. And so now we've been directed to advocate for that indigenous right of free, prior, and informed consent. So those are two just really brief updates. And we could send out in a follow-up email more information about those, but just wanted to alert those two particular pieces that are, I think, relevant to us. And now to conclude our time together, if I could have a volunteer or two, Barry, myself, and maybe one or two other people, will read the Confession of Complicity. This was in response to the Doctrine of Discovery, and it was recited at the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church back in 2016. And of course, Barry has made reference to this a couple of times. Do I have a volunteer? I can go first, and then Barry, and then do we have anyone else? You can just speak out. I can't see all your faces right now. One more person. Thank you. You are Aline?
Aline Russell.
Aline. So we'll go in that order. Me, Barry, Aline, and repeat. Me, Barry, Aline. And we'll probably get like 3 times for each person, if that makes sense. Okay, and we'll go slide by slide. And I'll go ahead and start. The 222nd General Assembly offers an apology to Native Americans, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians, and commits to do the following. We apologize to United States citizens of Native American ancestry, both those within and beyond our denomination. We offer this apology especially to those who were and are part of stolen generations, during the Indian assimilation movement, namely former students of Indian boarding schools, their families, and their communities.
We apologize for the pain and suffering that our church's involvement in the Indian boarding school system has caused. We are aware of some of the damage that this cruel and ill-conceived system of assimilation has perpetrated on United States citizens of Native American ancestry. For this, we are truly and most humbly sorry.
To those individuals who were physically, sexually, and emotionally abused as students of the Indian boarding schools in which the PCUSA was involved, we offer you our most sincere apology. You did nothing wrong. You were and are the victims of evil acts that cannot, under any circumstances, be justified or excused.
We know that many within our church will still not understand why each of us must bear the scar, the blame for this horrendous period in U.S. history. But the truth is, we are the bearers of many blessings from our ancestors, and therefore we must also bear their burdens.
Our burdens include dishonoring the depths of the struggles of Native American people and the richness of your gifts. Therefore, we confess to you that when our Presbyterian ancestors journeyed to this land within the last few centuries, we did not respect your own indigenous knowledge and epistemologies as valid.
In our zeal to tell you of the good news of Jesus Christ, our hearts and minds were closed to the value of your own epistemologies and lifeways. We did not understand the full extent of the gospel of Christ. We should have affirmed the commonality between your spirituality and our understanding that God's sovereignty extends with length from east to west, with breadth from north to south, with depth throughout the earth, and with height throughout the sky and heavens.
Even worse, we arrogantly thought that Western European culture and cultural expressions were necessary parts of the gospel of Christ. We imposed our civilization as a condition for your accepting the gospel. We tried to make you be like us, and in so doing, we helped to diminish the sacred vision that made you who you are. Thus, we demonstrated that we did not fully understand the gospel we were trying to preach.
We know that apology is only a first step in the larger hope of repentance and reconciliation. We seek the guidance of relationships with your people within and beyond our church as we seek to identify and act on restorative practices and policies at the relational, communal, and national level.
We are in the midst of a long and painful journey as we reflect on the cries that we did not or would not hear and how we have behaved as a church. As we travel this difficult road of repentance, reconciliation, and healing, we commit ourselves to work toward ensuring that we will never again use our power as a church to hurt others with our attitudes of racial and spiritual superiority.
We seek God's forgiveness, healing grace, and guidance as we take steps toward building mutually respectful, compassionate, and loving relationships with Indigenous peoples. We also seek
your forgiveness and hope you will walk together with us in the Spirit of Christ and partner with us as equals as we participate in God's redemption of the world so that our peoples may be blessed and God's creation healed.
Finally, we pray that you will hear the sincerity of these words and that you will witness the living out of our apology in our actions in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Barry, for your time today with us. It was so compelling and interesting and insightful. Thank you, everyone, for your participation and great questions and comments. And remember, Eileen, I'll turn to you for any final last announcements.
Yeah, just I'm putting a Zoom registration link in the chat. We are having our first Centering Partners Voices call next Tuesday. This is kind of a sister call that goes along with this one, but it has a more global audience. So we're inviting partners and frontline communities from all over the world, as well as U.S. Presbyterians, to gather to learn about what frontline communities and partners are faced with, dealing with these different issues. And our first call is going to be on agrotoxins in El Salvador connected to the sugarcane industry. And we'll be hearing from our partners, Arumes. There'll be simultaneous translation will be provided, Spanish, English, English, Spanish, as well as in French. Yeah, we would love to see you. That call is 12 p.m. Eastern to 1:30. It's an hour and a half rather than 1 hour. And we will record that for anyone who can't make it, but hopefully you'll be able to join us then.
Quick question. If I may
Yes.
ask a quick question, please. Maybe addressing it to anybody who can answer. How is it decided the topic for this time together for the next month?
For next month,
Has that been determined, or may I offer a suggestion for a topic and work with somebody on achieving
Sure.
that goal?
If you want to email us anyone can email me any suggestions that you have for future topics, and we'll take that into consideration.
Okay, wonderful. We'll do. Thank you.
well, thank you all. I think that ends our solidarity hour.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
This was
you.